So, to close this out, what is something everyone should reflect on regarding AI?
I don't know if you're going to want to cut this out, but I think shit's going to get really real really quick. And like,
Hello and welcome. This is the Demystifying Cosmetics podcast, where we pull back the curtain and offer insightful explorations into the world of beauty. I'm your host, Jennifer Cookson, R&D professional, industry veteran, and beauty enthusiast. And I'm excited today to be welcoming Potion.ai co-founders, Malik and Yahya Syed. We'll be talking a little bit about artificial intelligence and its application in personal care. So welcome, guys. Tell me a little bit about Potion.ai. Give me your sell.
yeah, so well, obviously, well, maybe not obviously. Neither of us have backgrounds actually in chemistry or in formulation. This all started a few years ago when we quit our jobs. I took a trip to Korea. We were very interested. I was very interested in starting a skincare brand.
Oh, I don't think I've heard this story of your journey into personal care.
Yeah, no, I really badly wanted to start a skincare brand. I thought it would be really cool and a lot of fun, and thought that there'd be no better place to go than Korea to check out what the latest and greatest is. And came back home and spent a lot of time with Alex, a childhood friend of mine, and now one of our co-founders, just talking about how AI could be applied in the space of personal care and cosmetics. And this is, 2018, 2019, back when like no one really cared about AI outside of a handful of nerds. And
pre-pandemic.
Yeah, pre-pandemic, different times. And we were just obsessed with this idea of how, you could take some of the concepts of what you were seeing in pharma and apply them more broadly. And so, we Alex basically also decided he was willing to quit his job, and that's at the same time we roped into Hajab, who has a background in brand and design, and away we went. And maybe Hajab can share kind of how that turned into what Potion is now.
Yeah, so our idea was basically that we were going to become the Estee Lauder of the future. So we were like, planning on becoming this tech-powered house of brands where all of the formulations would be, generated with the AI models that Alex had been working on. And the way that those worked were, you could input basically elements or attributes of a product brief, and our models would spit out viable starter formulas. And so at that time, what we, wanted to do was, okay, well, this is how we're going to power our own brands. So we had an idea for our first brand, and it was kind of sustainability focused, and we, generated these starter formulas accordingly. And then obviously we had to get them made in real life. So that's when, we met a cosmetic chemist, and that is kind of when things really changed, because, he was very enthusiastic about the technology we had developed and was like, this really automated a lot of my upfront research process and made it so I can get to the bench faster, which is where I enjoy spending time anyway. And so that's kind of when we were like, okay, it seems like we're definitely onto something. And that was also, though, when we ran into like the plethora of issues and challenges.
I was actually going to say, if we took a step back in thinking about, you're saying like, we were able to spit out formulas based on attributes. What goes into that, though? You need some data set that you're pulling from. So can you talk a little bit about how you even start to think about that and collect that information?
Yeah, so there's like, to your point, a million things that go into that. I think at the time what we were doing is we were basically using product reviews and sentiment analysis on an individual ingredient basis to help us determine, which ingredients were best suited to match particular claims. So there are these things called GANs, which stands for like generative adversarial networks. And, as weird as this sounds, you can essentially feed a GAN, in this case, a bunch of formulas. So let's say moisturizer formulas or cleanser formulas, etc. And if you show the GAN enough formulas, it can establish a sense for what it means to be a moisturizer formula. So if you take that and you pair that with, some form of optimization, right? So in this case, ingredient sentiment, you can do some pretty interesting things. So that's what we did then. And, since we've just been trying to add, to the number of features, that we are effectively optimizing for. But, there are other ways to get to the same.
Yeah. Did you guys ever create formulas and then have them made and just be wildly off?
So luckily, no, but that's mostly thanks to the cosmetic chemist, Mark. So he would look at them and be like, I am not going to bother making that. So, he was kind of our
yeah.
Like
well, then
judge.
Do you take his input and then refine the model, using his feedback, so that like human element, right, of either initial review, right? I think we've talked before about, these tools need to be able to be as good, right, as the chemist. And so if he was looking at it and saying, I don't think this belongs in there, or even making it in the field in a line, how do you capture that information to feed back into the model to refine it so that it's more precise?
Yeah. So, that's the, in our opinion, the $1 million question, right?
Yeah.
So we spent a lot of time now, if you think of where we started from to where we are now, like we've spent a lot of time building workflow software to help with this exact point, because, you need to continue capturing data to improve these models, and these models are inherently backwards looking. So, you need to like Mark, in that time we were just listening to Mark and coding things in, but in an ideal world, you have, all the chemists or formulators on your staff, experimenting. Every experiment is being recorded. All the relevant attributes are being measured, so on and so forth. So yeah, that's probably the biggest part of all of this.
Yeah. So that's a little bit, I guess, about the formulation element of where you guys started. But in general, as a whole, how do you feel AI is able to transform, cosmetic R&D, product development, consumer insights, predicting trends, all of that?
Honestly, we feel like there won't be any piece of the stack, let's call it, that will go untouched. And so, I think there's a lot that can be done on figuring out what product to make in the first place, whether that's an ingredient or a formula. And then there's how to make that product. And then there's all like the administrative tasks that have to take place for that to be done. So it could be anything from identifying what the right trends are in the market to, attack, figuring out what the right ingredients might be to leverage those trends, how to put those together in a formula, how to test for things like chemical stability or safety, how to manage through the regulatory regime and making sure you're making a compliant product, so on and so forth. So,
I think you're also starting to, or have been seeing these concepts get applied in beauty already. So, if you think of some of the different facets of product development that Yahya touched on, if it's like personalization or customization of formulas, you do have companies that are doing a really great job at that. So, like Function of Beauty or Pros and things like that, they're using AI in that way. And then there's also like the trend prediction side of it where, how do you kind of use AI to anticipate what might happen next? And
I was just going to ask that because, right, there is trends where it's like, well, people are buying this a lot. But in terms of product development, right, you're looking at a 12 to 18 month life cycle. So you almost need to be ahead. Like it doesn't matter what people are, well, it does, but it's less relevant to understand what people are using now versus what they'll be looking to in the future.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's where some of these really large data sets around consumer behavior and, what they're starting to care about even beyond beauty become really interesting. So kind of like social listening And there is a company called Spate that does a really good job at that, where, they're kind of listening to what trends are happening and helping companies in the beauty industry predict, okay, well, consumers in food are starting to care about XYZ topics. And so that's where things might go next. And then that's a way for, it's a great application of AI, because actually a lot of the gigantic data sets are on the consumer side in terms of, what they spend money on, like what they're posting on social media. Whereas on the R&D side, one of the issues usually is that the data sets aren't that large. And so that can make the application of AI a little bit more difficult and nuanced.
Yeah. And then in terms of using AI and machine learning to develop new formulations, I know that there's been a lot of discussion in, the ability to maybe create some novel, texture. But what I find to be very difficult is when you're looking at the industry, right? You have lotions that feel like lotions, right? Or serums that feel like serums. So what is the advantage that this provides in terms of really new formulation development?
I think that's a good question. I would say, from what we see today, I think it can consider more things than I think a single human on an individual basis can at any given moment. So as an example, like one of the things we've seen, looking back to the very first application on our side was, Mark saw an emulsifier package in one of the AI generated formulas that he had never thought to use. He'd used both of those substances in the past before, but he hadn't ever thought to use them together. So I think, it can, I think where the creativity can be applied is if you have a unique trend or insight that you have established, figuring out how you can then incorporate that into the formula context, I think is one way you can apply creativity. And the other is just seeing combinations or permutations that you wouldn't have maybe considered otherwise. Yeah. So yeah, I think those, at least to me, I don't know, Jeff, if you have anything to add there, but those are the two.
No, I think it kind of goes back again to what are these models useful for and good at. And so in the same way, if you as a human, it's you can be creative, of course, about, should I make, a moisturizer in a stick format, or should I make, a gel to foam to oil emulsion, or, those sorts of things. And I think where AI can be interesting to incorporate in that workflow is just its ability to create so many combinations and permutations at once. And then maybe you as a human can just, if it generates 10 things, be like, oh, this one's interesting and these 9 are not. And so it just makes your process faster, but that human touch and judgment, obviously is still a necessary component.
Yeah. So again, this is more of a synergistic versus replacement of your cosmetic chemist.
I would double click on that actually, because that's something
that's the fear.
Yeah, I mean, if I had, $1 for every time that someone reacts to Potion, or, just people using the words AI in that way, where I think the gut reaction tends to be kind of skepticism or fear or, avoidance. And it's oh, are you trying to replace a formulator, or, trying to replace XYZ process? And I think what you alluded to is exactly right, that it's, I think, more assistive. And so the way that you should really be framing it is it's just another tool in your toolkit. So how can you use these tools to your advantage to make your job easier or more efficient, or allow you to focus on things that you actually like doing, and maybe cut out some, manual or repetitive processes that potentially aren't that great, of a use of your brain power in the first place. So assistive versus, replacement, definitely.
Yeah. And I guess in terms of how it may enhance or complement product testing, how do you feel? What do you think about that?
I think it can really reduce the rate of failure quite substantially. We have some experience doing this. We built some models to help with this. And, I don't think there's any situation where testing goes away, at least anytime in the near future. But, I think chemists can kind of go in with a lot more confidence And an organization can go in with a lot more confidence knowing that like it's going to pass stability testing, this formula, it's going to pass pilot,
Yeah.
like stability testing and so on and so forth. So that's actually a really great use case.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about, when you do toxicology, right? There's a lot of in silico or read across that's done. Very similarly, this could be applied so that, there is obviously not replacing these assays of either safety or regulatory, but really ensuring lessening the risk going in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think this also goes to the point of just, having your data recorded at all. Because, for some applications of AI, stability testing in particular, in our experience, there wasn't a ton of data to work with in the first place because companies they were definitely recording stability successes, but, hadn't thought to record stability failures. And to train the AI models, you both are really important. And so that's also a consideration, when people talk about, where to get started with AI or, what can I be doing to prepare myself? I think just recording everything and, it doesn't have to be crazy, but even if you just keep yourself organized in the Google Drive and just, have one place where you're recording not only, good things, but bad things or just really everything that happened, then you can later on leverage that in some interesting ways.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, in thinking about established businesses, right, how do you start to integrate this into workflows as they exist? And I think you touched upon the data recording, right? And so in what either you're looking to offer the industry or even Potion.ai, does that then become, though, a very unique, taking that data and having to kind of manually enter it into like a unique code so that it's pulling relevant information? Or is there, some relatively systematic general ways that you can take data from companies and put that into an existing platform to just easily be integrated into workflows?
Yeah, so I think the way we think about this is like we're very like problem and then hopefully corresponding solution oriented. So in some cases it can be very much like, okay, it's like a cookie cutter approach, right? Like we are recording stability testing in this way, and here are the different sorts of tests you can have. You're recording on these like time point intervals. And then we have this like master model into which all this data is being fed. As more data is incorporated, the models get more and more accurate, so on and so forth. But in other cases, it's not as straightforward. So, some folks are very sensitive to how their data is commingled with other organizations' data. They want their own models. They see their innovation as proprietary. And so, the answer isn't so straightforward, and it also depends on depending on the problem that you're trying to solve, like the set of models you might use are different, right? So these large language models that have like kind of come into the zeitgeist in the last couple of years, I mean, the sorts of things they can help with are very different than the sort of model you would use to, for example, predict the toxicology profile or stability profile of a product. So it just very much depends. And we try to build tools on our side that, keeping in mind like what someone may do from like an AI perspective, like what should like the data capture look like.
And I guess that leads a little bit into, what gets in the way of companies. I think you mentioned a little bit of this like proprietary information, but what are some of those things that, are prohibitive to adoption of AI?
I think, some of it is just, and if you think about what our current platform now offers, right, is now we're kind of just trying to get people used to using these tools, enjoy using these tools, and, making it less intimidating. So like the current offerings, which are free on our platform, are very much oriented around just a few traditionally manual workflows regarding like evaluating benchmarks or, how hard it is to just find the right ingredient to use in your formula because, the information is really hard to sift through and filter on and things like that. Both of those are problem areas that, you can apply AI to, and people want to use it, but it doesn't, again, it's not too intimidating where it's like, oh, I have to give you all my data and in exchange, you're going to do X, Y, Z. So I'd say that's what we're focused on more now. And that's been going really well. And I think people like that. And I do think one of the things that gets in the way of adoption of some of this stuff is, I mean, I'm biased, but I feel like the interface and the user experience becomes so important. Because if you think about tools that you use in your everyday life, like apps in your personal life, like Uber, Spotify, etc., a lot of those probably have AI embedded or like technologies embedded in there that you're not really actively thinking about because you're just using the tools as intended and they make your life easier and you probably enjoy using the app. Versus in the industry, what you see a lot is really cumbersome software and cumbersome tools that almost make people want to just do whatever they were doing manually because it might take just as long. I mean, we've talked to CMs who are doing, like millions and millions of dollars in sales, and they use like 2 of their 12 PLM modules because they're like, I can't even, deal with this. So I do think the interface is something that's really underrated. And even if you think about ChatGPT, right, like the frameworks that they're using have existed for actually a long time in the tech space, but one of their winning innovations was the way they productized that. And they've made it so that it's really simple, easy to use, no matter who you are, where you're from, your age range. You can just log in, you get it, and you use it, and look at where that's at today. So,
yeah.
Okay, real quick. Raise your hand if you have dealt with active instability. If you have ever opened a jar of retinol cream and smelt an off odor, or noticed your formula went dark brown, chances are you are dealing with active instability. It's never fun when the formula you've been working on goes south and the due date is only days away. That's why we've encapsulated the trickier ingredients to work with so you can kick the stability struggle to the curb. From retinol to vitamin C, we make it easier to work with those ingredients that typically give you that 3 p.m. headache. The cellulose shell shields the active from outside exposure. Things like air and light that are likely to cause active breakdown, giving you the power to create stable and effective formulas without the trial and error. Ready to quickly create effective skincare formulas? Discover Tagra's Cellucaps line by going to tagra.com/cellucaps. So, have you encapsulated yet? Now back to the show.
I guess, when you were talking about user experience, what came to mind was that I feel as if the cosmetic raw material space is a little like the old, door-to-door salesman, right? Where you have distributors or, large manufacturers who have a sales force that really likes to be intimate, right? Provides customer service. They come on site, and a lot of times, right, that's how you are thinking about what ingredients to use. Is like, oh, I got this package from so-and-so. How do you think, because what we're talking about a lot right now is more in terms of product developers, right, and cosmetic chemists. If we think about that role, a little bit more on that like marketing and sales side of things, how do you think this technology can augment their role? I know this is like off script, but it came to mind.
I mean, this is a great question. And I think what's interesting about this is it feels to us, we were actually just talking about this like the other day. This is something that someone can like make progress on today.
Yeah.
Our very strong recommendation would be that you start recording every single call that you have with a customer, every single meeting you might have, so on and so forth. And with these tools, you can kind of just throw all the transcripts into like, a database effectively and ask really pointed questions of like, what are the common, statements I'm making that are resonating with customers? What's like not resonating? What are like the key pain points customers have shared with me on a consistent basis? Like you can do that on a company by company or lead by lead basis or just generally. So, go ahead, Hajab.
No, I think another example in that same direction is, how do you make the time that those people are spending with the customer just like more valuable? So I'm thinking like, if you wanted to just start using AI tomorrow, maybe it's something like an AI chatbot on your website that just answers questions that are just, really repetitive that everyone asks, and maybe that's not the best use of time for someone on the ground that's meeting with the customer in person. You know, those sorts of questions could be maybe more technical or specific to the customer.
Sure. And I think this goes back into that whole like replacement versus augmenting. You know, when I think about raw material vendors and you're asking, okay, you can ask questions and drop it into, you know, a repository and pull from it. What matters even more, right, is what the questions are that you're asking. I think there's always that analogy of, you know, the car. No one ever said, oh, you know, I want a car. They wanted a faster horse and thus a car was made, right?
Yeah.
So there is that element of still needing a human interface. And I think that's great what you said, Hajab, in general. Like, how do you actually create more value in that time that you're spending with consumers rather than just going through portfolios?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we tend to think of all of these tools like these are tools, right? And so it's like it's the equivalent. This is the tractor, not the farmer, right? And with the tractor now, farmers can farm more land, and
we should let's just keep making analogies for everything. So I guess, you know, this leads into a little bit of what are some common misconceptions about AI. You know, we touched upon that like whole it's going to replace and that fear mongering, right? But what are, from your perspective, some of the biggest misconceptions?
I think another one that comes to mind is, again, a little bit of a misconception, but also just maybe common reaction I'm seeing these days is, you know, people are kind of tired of hearing about it. So they're like, you know, it's like every company out there is like, we're an AI company now, you know, look at our AI tools. Here's how you should be using AI and all this stuff. And I totally get why that's frustrating, you know, and kind of makes you numb to the word AI. And you're just like, you know, you don't want to engage with it. But I think that it's obviously, I don't think it's a fad. I think the right like reframing is just like any other maybe like technological or industrial revolution that's happened in the past. It's just we're kind of in the middle of it right now. So it's very emergent. We're seeing how it's affecting everyone's lives. And, you know, over time, we'll see like where does it work and where does it not? And where do we all choose to incorporate it into our lives and in what ways? So I think that, you know, to fight that sort of misconception, I think it's really important to just be open-minded to, you know, like just trying stuff out and keep using what you like to use. And if you don't like something, then you don't have to use it. And, you know, eventually you should end up with a toolkit that is really helpful for you.
Yeah. And to continue with the analogies, it's kind of like,
yes,
it's like websites, right? It's like no one in 2024 is like, oh my God, check it out. I got a website. Like I use the internet to like run my business. You know, it's like, it's, you know, you're probably living under a rock if you don't use that. So I think to Hijab's point, like we're kind of just in the early innings of this where everyone thinks it's cool and eventually it's just going to be embedded. And, you know, I think that'll be beneficial net for everyone. Yeah.
Although sometimes I think about advances in technology and how they might have made some of us less intelligent. I always think about, for instance, navigation, right? I grew up in the time where you needed a map or you asked someone for directions, right? You also had to pay a toll. You had to look at a card that showed which toll you were going to, and you'd calculate how much money you'd have to give the person. I am not quite sure if people like my son could navigate that. So in terms of, you know, I've seen, I had an individual on my team who I had ChatGPT write a biography for him, and I read it. And I said, "This is good. It looks like you use ChatGPT." You know, how do we start to avoid a lot of that potential uniformity, right? In this like, you know, kind of pattern, right? It's a pattern. So you start to read things that maybe are a little bit too similar or too succinct, right? And so, you know, what is, you know, when you talk about we're just in the infancy or kind of, you know, of this, is that something you think in the future will expand, that it's going to, you know, you'll read something or you'll look at something and not realize that there's been AI used in it?
So I think that's definitely going to happen. I think these models are only going to get better and better, and I think we're all going to have little AI assistants that know us better than we know ourselves, and it's like Siri that actually works in our phones and in our lives. I do think whether it's now or later, like I think human judgment, to your point, and discernment is like critical, and hopefully, you know, when it comes to ourselves, your kid, whomever, like that is like the skill that's like nurtured. And it's like, okay, if ChatGPT made this biography, how do I make it not sound like it was, you know, spit out of this like, you know, random, you know, token generator?
Okay, yeah. So to that point, as this technology continues to evolve, I think that, you know, just the human touch and human intervention and human judgment will become more and more valuable. So I could see a scenario in which, you know, we start actually going back to some of these skills more, of, you know, just using our hands and creating art and things like that. And because AI would be embedded in so many things, you know, just what a human can contribute will become, like, people will start seeking it out in a way that, you know, perhaps doesn't happen today.
Yeah, and that's a really nerd out, but I think like sovereignty will become a really important piece where it's like, you know, like I want art that is generated by a human, even if I can't actually tell whether it was made by a human or AI.
Yeah.
And I will be willing to pay more for that. And I need to somehow verify and validate that it was in fact made by a human rather than not. So yeah, you already see this with like voice. I don't know if you guys have come across this, but like like they're really good at impersonating people, and it's like, okay, how do you know if it's that person or not?
Well, I feel like that the good thing about that is, right, this diminishes that kind of you know, the follow around any celebrity and taking photographs and capturing them doing something, you know, like you can easily just be like, oh, that's a deep fake, right? So that's like that's a benefit actually in that term. And I do see, you know, I find that I use things like Chat GPT more for like a brainstorming, almost like, you know, I living in a solitary home, you know, sometimes I need to bounce things off of people. And that's generally where I'm like, oh, what's another word for this? And I'm like, okay, maybe, you know.
yeah, totally.
Okay. So to close this out, what is something everyone should reflect on regarding AI?
I don't know if you're going to want to cut this out, but I think shit's going to get really real really quick. And like, you know, and like, I think I keep using this analogy and I hope it's not tired out, but it's like, I forget who said it, but someone was talking about how like, if you're on like an exponential curve, when you look ahead, it looks vertical. It looks like you're facing a wall. And when you look back, it looks flat. It looks like you haven't made any progress. And I think things are going to just continue accelerating.
Yeah.
And I think the world's going to look like a very different place in the next 5 to 10 years. And, you know, in some ways that's really scary, but in other ways it's like really exciting. And, you know, I think being willing to adapt to change, being willing to try to do things in different ways, you know, and this is whether it's like in the cosmetics industry or otherwise, you know, I think that can be really beneficial. So I think, you know, just keeping an open mind, and you know, like being willing to adapt. I think that's like really, really important. I think we're in for a wild ride, and I think it'll be a good ride. You know, like I'm excited for a better series.
You know, it's interesting because, you do see AI in gaming, in customer service, but, you know, you guys have been in a unique position of applying it to, you know, R&D in cosmetics. So a little bit niche, but still, I see so much opportunity to start looking at things, not just in terms of selecting ingredients, but creating formulas that deliver an ingredient optimally, right? So having the best performing formulations, being able to, I think a lot of times consumers use words that, you know, are not, you know, if I give you a formula and you say, it's a little bit wet, what does that mean? So being able to translate that, you know, kind of these feelings into an actual, you know, change that can be made at a chemical basis is huge.
Yeah.
And I think, when you talk about, being on that exponential curve, which I love, that really is kind of that new frontier of what and where as an industry we can go.
Yeah, we totally agree. And I think even just some of the like models that are being released, every day, it helps a company like ours get closer and closer to that vision you just described, right? Where you can just kind of type in natural language, like, what do you want? Like, what are you looking for? Or how do you want to change this product? And be presented with like, a very promising, recipe.
I think that could even come from just better leveraging existing data about raw materials. Because if you look at how it's done today, it takes a long time to kind of understand and, as a human process, like all the clinical studies for raw material and, formulas that the supplier may have tried it in and all of that. And then you kind of have to synthesize and come to a conclusion of how to formulate then and how it might impact the formula. But I could imagine a future where, if all of that data is incorporated into an AI model, then you can kind of interact with it in this question and answer way and maybe just faster get to like an efficacious formula. So it's not really like some brand new crazy innovation, but really just better leveraging data that already exists.
Yeah. And I think, also, I know you talked about personalization, but I do think that this has the ability for even increased diversity and inclusion, right? And looking at like the microbiome, right? A lot of the data that has been obtained in terms of the skin microbiome has been from, weird countries, the, Western economic, industrialized, democratized countries. That there's significant gaps, I think, in terms of inclusivity and diversity for formulations, and how AI is applied there, I think is another really kind of like white space.
Yeah, that's a great point. Could not agree more.
Well, awesome. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about? You want to do your plug on where we can find Potion.ai?
Yeah. Potion's platform is free to use for product developers, formulators, marketers, anyone who's really interested in making a product. And you can sign up on our website, www.Potion.ai, and it's free, and we hope you enjoy it. And we're always available via email if you have questions or feedback. And yeah.
Awesome. Are you guys going to be at any of the upcoming events? I think Cosmoprof in Las Vegas.
Yes, we will be there. We're trying to figure out. We don't have a booth, so we're going to be lurking.
So if anyone wants to set up a meeting, it'll have to be standing, right. But you'll be there. That's
right. We'll be there. We're trying to figure out some way to stick out like sore thumbs on the floor. So if you have any ideas, or if anyone in the audience, if this releases before Cosmoprof, we'd love to hear them.
But we'll be there on the floor, and if everyone should feel free to come up and say hi. And if you heard the podcast, then that'd be cool.
Yeah,
cool. All right. Well, thank you guys for being on this episode. I appreciate it, and it's a very interesting topic, and I look forward to seeing everything that you guys do in the future.
Thanks for having us. This was great.
Thank you.